Hi there. So today we're going to wrap up our study of Berger's ways of seeing, and with that we're going to conclude our whole study of the philosophy of sex, love, and friendship. And so what I want to do is return to the theme that we were starting with last time of the notion of the nude and the notion of the male gaze, and I want to pursue that a little bit farther. And then we'll turn to the theme of the naked, which he opposes to the nude, and think about the distinctive significance of that with respect to our sexuality. And so with the nude, what I want to do is bring out sort of the companion study to what I was talking about last time. So last time we were looking at the relationship between the notion of the nude, which is the woman as an object, broadly in relationship to that sort of theme of femininity that Simone de Beauvoir was talking about in The Second Sex. Right? In other words, we were looking at the role of woman and the situation of women as that is cast in this way of interpreting women as objects. What I want to do now is look at the notion that's paired with that notion of femininity, namely the notion of masculinity. Right? So I want to ask now, what is the role of the man in the context in which women are construed as objects? So we're going to talk about that first, and then, as I said, we'll go on and talk about the naked. So just to get back to the theme of the nude, what Berger was looking at before then was initially the sort of development in the history of European painting of this way of portraying women as objects, right? So he was saying, there's a sort of historical thing that's happened in our culture, which is the development of a conventionalized way of portraying a woman as an object, which is then also a conventionalized way for women to act and to posture themselves so as to make themselves desirable objects, to show themselves to be succeeding in that role. Right? So he's talking about the way that notion of the nude in European painting has defined a particular kind of role, a particular kind of performance that women can engage in to show themselves to be desirable objects. And so he wanted to show that in European painting, and then one of the things he wanted to do was connect that to contemporary advertising. And so we talked a little bit about that in the last time, and he especially talks about that in chapter 7 of the book. And I want to emphasize one thing about that, right? What he's saying there is that what's one of the big things that's happened there, is that this sort of product, woman as object, has been used for various purposes. Especially, it's been used for the purpose of selling other products, and then he talks a little bit about the context in which that works. And I want to read one line from that. This is on page 143. He says, "All publicity works upon anxiety," and that's the only point I want to bring out here. So you of course you need things. You need to be able to get your car to work, or to make your dishes clean, or whatever, to have some nice clothes and so on. And so you want to know where to get the right kind of dish soap or the right kind of car repair or whatever. So there's a kind of information you actually need. But he's saying that's not what advertising is about. Advertising isn't about giving you important factual information to allow you to deal with the real everyday needs of your practical life. On the contrary, what advertising does is it plays on your anxiety. It plays on your sense that you're not good enough, that you're insecure about the meaningfulness of your life, about the success of your life, about yourself. Are you really making it? Remember Lang talking about that issue in our lives of ontological insecurity, right? That the insecurities we can have about the sense of our own worth and our own value and so on. He's saying that's what advertising plays on. And what it does is it basically tells you need these things in order to be successful. If you have this, you will be successful. And success, as he says, largely means being enviable, right? Having others envy you, right? And so that's the theme throughout chapter 7 of his book, is the way that advertising works on anxiety. It sort of proposes envy as a kind of solution, and to become enviable, you need to get these other products, right? And that's what's going to make you glamorous, and your life's going to be worthwhile, right? And so, and what's in the image of that? Well, this is where, I was particularly looking at this Dos Equis ad, right? When really being successful mostly means having these beautiful women around you. And so that's one of the points I was trying to make last time, was that the possession of women is itself, in this context, not really particularly about women or about the possession of women. It's about something else you're going to get from that, a certain kind of status you're going to get from that. I want to just remind you of those issues and think about this, I think, fairly familiar context in which women are portrayed as objects. Now I want you to think about another, I think, fairly familiar context in which women are portrayed as objects. And that is pornography. And so, again, I only want to make a couple of small points about that. So I don't want to particularly say something negative about pornography as such. I think it's easy to imagine erotically stimulating depictions of sex. Why wouldn't people be interested in that? But I want you to think about what the reality of pornography as we know it is. And I'll just read one line from Berger. This is back from chapter 3 again. This is on page 57. He says, he's been talking about the naked and the nude in European painting, and he says, there are a few exceptional nudes in the European tradition of oil painting, to which very little of what has been said above applies. Indeed, they are no longer nudes, in the strict sense that he's been talking about that, because they break the norms of the art form. They are paintings of loved women, more or less naked. And then he says, this is the line I'm really after, among the hundreds of thousands of nudes which make up the tradition, there are perhaps 100 of these exceptions. So that's kind of what I want to say about pornography. No doubt you can imagine lots of different things that could happen in depictions of sex, but I think it's pretty clear that the overwhelming reality of pornography, that huge industry as it functions in our contemporary culture, is the depiction of women as objects for men. And so I'm not going to try to prove that. I'm not going to get involved in an empirical study of pornography, but I take it that that's going to be pretty easy to see that the bulk of what counts as pornography is depictions of women in the role of object for satisfying the man. And so I want to think about two things there. First, I want you just to notice one fact about that, and that is that primarily the pornography is something that is a product that's consumed by men watching it. So in other words, pornography is something done in front of a camera and put on a screen. And it's for the benefit of someone who's going to look at it. So that's the first thing I'd like you to notice about it. And then the second thing I want to raise about it is just a question. Right? So here you're getting, in pornography, you're kind of getting a claim that this is sex that you're seeing. At a certain level, no doubt that's true, but the point that I want to make, in keeping with the Berger argument, is that you're seeing sex construed as a man engaging with a woman as an object. We will go on in a minute to talk about how else we might construe sex, but I want to ask, what is the significance of this? What is actually at play in that a kind of orientation to sex that is built around wanting to have the woman be an object? So that's the thing that I want to talk about now. And so I said before that I wanted to look at the flip side of the theme of femininity by looking at the theme of masculinity. And that's what I want to take up now. What is masculinity? What is the role of the man when we construe that as the one who is, for whom this woman is being an object? So we're continuing then to talk about that theme of the male gaze. And part of the reason that I wanted to bring out that point about the camera was I wanted to emphasize that notion of the gaze, the notion of looking. Um, so, so last time I talked at one point about the desiring gaze of the man. And I want to bring that theme back up and now ask you to think about that and ask, is that really the right word for it? Is that male gaze that we've been talking about, right? The male attitude that takes up the woman as an object, is that really desire? Or at least is that the best word to use to describe it? And it seems to me that in fact I would think a different word is better, and that is the evaluating gaze or the judging gaze. In other words, that orientation to the woman as an object is one that's sort of measuring her up and trying to figure out how well she succeeds on that scale of what women are supposed to look like, right? And I want to read you a quotation from Berger again that I'm pretty sure I read before. Yeah, I did. Because on page 46, he says, "Men survey women before treating them." Right. So in other words, he's saying there the primary attitude towards women in this way of construing things is first to check them out and see how good a job they're doing on the woman scale. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, I want you to think about what it means to be the one who can evaluate, right? Mostly it means it's the one who has power, right? So again, let's go back and look at an image again, right? Remember, this is the one that Berger showed us of the picture of all the naked women that he says, if you have this in the office of the businessman, like they can be reminded, oh, I'm a man, right? And the man is the one who has the power to judge and evaluate all those ones, the one who has power over them. That's the point I want to emphasize, right? That the male gaze is, in construing the woman as an object, is a way of being the one who's in the position of power, being the one who's in control. And so that goes along with a couple of other things, right? That goes along then with looking, with that camera eye, the eye of the consumer of pornography who gets to look at this thing and sort of stand back and judge. But notice that then is a distanced relationship. I mean, looking is a distance thing. Eyes are how you deal with things at a distance, which is contrary to touch, where you're sort of wrapped up with the thing, right? So notice that issue of consuming pornography that I was mentioning before is built around a relationship to the sexual situation that's much more one of looking than touching, much more one of staying at a distance than being absorbed in it. Right, so Berger says that when he talks about images that are cold and indifferent as opposed to warm and friendly, right? Where the idea then is that there's something about that gaze that is pointedly detached. Right? That's the cold indifference. Now, I just want you to think about that cold indifference and sexuality. That's a funny fit. Right? So I want to pick up on that a little bit more and think about that notion of the wanting to be in control and relating that to that notion of being kind of cold and indifferent toward the thing you're relating to. So look, I want you to go back and remember a particular thing we talked about when we talked about Freud, and that was the formation of the superego. Now, I already mentioned that in the context of Freud talking about the attitude women have to adopt when they see themselves through the perspective of the male gaze. I want you to think about the man now in that context. And so remember the thing that Freud said about the superego is that its formation is actually a little bit cruel, right? You have to develop a kind of oppositional attitude towards your own desires, right? It's that internalizing of aggression. And at the point, throughout with Freud was that, there are these things that people are going to go through, like that's how we develop. But the real issue is whether you get through those things in a kind of healthy way or not. Well, so I want you to think about then this notion of an unhealthy relationship to superego, right? And that was the point Freud was making about civilization, right? Our culture really encourages in us an unhealthy relationship to our superego. It really encourages us to become kind of anti-desire, to become kind of cold, and angry towards ourselves. Well, I want to pick up on that same theme here now with respect to sexuality. And so I want to mention a book. It's a book called Male Fantasies by a guy named Klaus Teweleit, which I recommend to you. It's a book really about exploring the male gaze, and it's done in a historical context. He looks at basically the images of women and the stories about women that circulated among the proto-fascist groups that grew into the Third Reich in Germany, Hitler's Third Reich. And the reason I'm interested in that book is because it brings together these two ideas of the unhealthy development of superego with the male gaze that we've been talking about. And the basic point is this, right? That sort of unhealthy development of superego is the real sense that you need to be in control of your desires, which is to say, there's something undesirable about your desires, something bad about your desires that you need to get away from. Desire, in other words, can become something that you are afraid of because you're not in control. And so what he tries to show is that notion then fits perfectly with an attitude towards sex, towards sexuality, in which your goal is to be in control, to be the one in control. And so that then fits very well with this sort of detached relationship to the object, where you're looking at it and evaluating it rather than being wrapped up in it. So I'm going to come back to that issue of being wrapped up in it a little bit later. But the point in particular then that he brings out about that is that this thing that's really a kind of fear of desire, correlated with a sense of one's own, morality, and the sense that one needs to be sort of pure and self-controlled and moral, translates very easily into extreme violence against desire, and that can especially mean violence against women, right? Because women then can represent the desire that one feels threatened by. So I want to just bring your attention to that connection, right? That the notion of the male gaze has an idea of masculinity built into it. And that masculine perspective that it identifies, that sees women as objects, women as things over which one has control, it's not very far removed from the idea that women are threats, and therefore it's not very far removed from violence against women. So that's a set of thoughts I'd like you to work with, just to complete then our discussion of the significance of this notion of the male gaze and what's at stake in it. So I want to move now from his talk about the nude as this sort of a paradigm that defines our culture's attitudes towards women, and go on to talk about the notion of the naked and what the significance of that is. So Berger talks about the theme of the naked on pages 58 to 60. That's where he talks about the relevance of that notion for our sexuality, and it's pretty powerful stuff. And so I just want to go through the basic point that I think he's trying to make there. And so, if the theme behind the nude is really control, the theme behind the naked, on the contrary, is desire. And so desire is so then he's saying to really be naked in relating to the other as naked, right? That is the much more the fulfillment of the idea of really being sexual or really being erotic. And what that involves is not control, but surrender, right? Letting go of control, letting go of being the one in charge, and giving yourself over to something, giving yourself over to your body and your desires, and giving yourself over to the other person. So surrender rather than control, engagement rather than detachment, right? Instead of being the judging one who's detached and looking on, or with, in the case of the woman as the object, instead of being detached from herself and doing some work on herself such that, sexual involvement is a job, basically, a project. The situation with both of those people is on the contrary, not being detached but being engaged, being right there in the process with the other person. And it's therefore also a matter of care rather than indifference, right? So sexuality based on the model of nakedness, or based on the ideal of nakedness, is a matter of care, engagement, and surrender, rather than sexuality based on the model of the nude, which is indifferent, detached, and controlling. Uh, and what is it that you're really doing in that situation? Well, you're letting yourself and the other be bodies. Right? You're letting yourself be a body, and you're letting the other person be a body. And you're actually reveling in the condition of being a body. You're sort of saying, I want to be a body. I want to have all this stuff that comes with being a body. What's the stuff that comes with being a body? Well, it's kind of messy. In sex, there are a lot of fluids that come out of you, right? And it's related to all those parts that are closely related to other kinds of functions, like breasts in the woman are related to breastfeeding, and genitals are closely related to urinating, and there's all those things all the things we think of as the bodily functions. The mouth is related to eating. There are a lot of smells, right? These things we think of as the bodily functions, or the kind of, sometimes we talk about them as the animal functions, right? They're all things that we could be embarrassed about. We often are embarrassed about them. We work in our social life to kind of hide those things. We use our deodorants and stuff like that, right? But they're also sites of pleasure, right? So again, remember Freud, right? These are erotogenic dimensions of our body, right? These are places where we get pleasurable stimulation, but they are also the things that we kind of turn against when in experiences of shame, and that's where that unhealthy superego can develop, right? But so the point is then, this sexuality understood on the model of nakedness is kind of saying yes to the pleasures that come to you from the fact of being a body, and saying that yes to someone else's pleasures of that sort, right? And being there together with that person in engaging with those things, which also means then sort of admitting about yourself in front of another that you want to do those things, and being the one who allows the other person to admit to that, right? So it's in that sense a way of making yourself vulnerable and caring for the vulnerability of the other person, right? And so it's on the one hand us sort of engaging with, or you might even accepting or owning our reality as bodies, and doing that together. And in that case, it becomes an opportunity for caring for the vulnerabilities of the other person, as I just said. Like I'm trying to emphasize the word care now, right? For engaging with that other person not as an object, but as a subject who has desires and vulnerabilities. And it's taking yourself as a subject who has desires and vulnerabilities, and letting the other person get in there with you in that domain. And so that's, as he says, it becomes a place for a shared subjectivity. He says, this is at the bottom of 59, This reality, by promising the familiar proverbial mechanism of sex, offers at the same time the possibility of the shared subjectivity of sex. Right? So, you as a body have all the things that other bodies have. You have genitals, you have orgasms, you have saliva, kisses, you have all those things. Like, we all have the same things in that respect. So that's what he means when he talks about the familiar proverbial mechanism of sex, right? He's saying, like, we're all going to turn to the same familiar reality. We're all going to do the same things, right? But what it's actually allowing for is you as this unique person to connect with that person, right? And so I want to add just one more line to that, and that's on page 60. He says, we can now understand the difficulty of creating a static image of sexual nakedness, because in lived sexual experience, nakedness is a process rather than a state. So, he's talking about images, he's talking about paintings and so on. But the point I want to bring out there is that the thing we're getting at here about nakedness is it's not exactly just a thing you have. It's not just a costume you could put on. It's something you have to do, and it's something you really have to do with someone else. And so I want to end on that point and just remind you that pretty much brings us back to the things we talked about in Plato again, where in Diotima's story, the thing she wanted to emphasize was the theme of connection with another soul, connection with another person. And Berger here, in talking about the naked, is, I think, precisely bringing out that idea that in our experiences of desire that we enact through our bodies, we have the capacity to ourselves be subjects connecting with other subjects, rather than either simply, objectifying ourselves or objectifying the other. So that's basically where I want to leave it. What I've tried to do is simultaneously use these, great voices of the tradition of philosophy to give us lenses for thinking about our own experience, thinking about friendship, love, sexuality, and so on, in a way that can empower us to more effectively engage with those dimensions of our life, of our lives. And at the same time, I've tried to introduce you to what I think of as many of the most insightful and powerful thinkers our whole human tradition has produced. So I hope that that's been worthwhile. I also hope it will encourage you to study further, either in sexuality or further works by these philosophical thinkers or others. If you're interested in that, I have various other lectures on YouTube you can look at if you want to explore some of these figures further. I also have written lots of books and so on if you're interested in the things I think about this. You could check those out. But in any case, I hope this has been worthwhile.